A 10-year-old girl walking down the aisle of a grand cathedral, not as a flower girl at a wedding, but to be crowned queen of one of medieval Europe's most powerful kingdoms. But this wasn't just any ordinary coronation. This young girl was about to make history as the first woman ever to rule Poland as a monarch in her own right. This is the extraordinary story of Jadwiga, a queen who shattered expectations and left a legacy that still echoes through the halls of history today. Now, you might be wondering how a child barely old enough to read properly ended up wearing a crown that had only ever sat on the heads of grown men. Well, buckle up, because this story is filled with political intrigue, family drama, and decisions that would reshape the map of Eastern Europe forever. Jadwiga was born in 1373 or 1374 in the magnificent city of Buda, the daughter of King Louis I of Hungary and Poland. Her father wasn't just any king. He was one of the most powerful rulers of his time, controlling vast territories that stretched across Central Europe. Her mother, Elizabeth of Bosnia, came from noble blood that connected young Jadwiga to some of the most influential families of the medieval world. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Even though Jadwiga was officially a member of the prestigious Capetian House of Anjou, basically medieval Europe's equivalent of royalty, she actually had more Polish blood running through her veins than French Angevin ancestry. This wasn't just a genealogical curiosity, it was the key that would unlock her path to the Polish throne. The Polish nobles could look at this young girl and see not just a foreign princess, but someone whose very DNA connected her to their homeland. When 1384 arrived, everything changed. Jadwiga, at the tender age of 10 or 11, found herself being crowned Queen of Poland. Can you imagine being that young and suddenly having the fate of an entire kingdom resting on your shoulders? While other children her age were learning their letters and playing with toys, Jadwiga was learning statecraft and making decisions that would affect thousands of lives. But here's what makes this story even more remarkable. Her reign wasn't just a ceremonial placeholder waiting for some adult male relative to take over. No, this was the real deal. Jadwiga would prove that leadership isn't about age or gender. It's about courage, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to your people. Her short but incredible reign would be packed with challenges that would test even the most experienced rulers, and achievements that would leave historians talking about her for centuries to come. If you're someone who loves diving deep into the mysteries of history and uncovering the incredible stories of the great empires that shaped our world, then you're in exactly the right place. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to the Medieval Archives, and make sure you don't miss a single episode of these amazing historical journeys we're taking together. Now let's talk about something that sounds almost impossible to believe in our modern world. Picture the scene. A 10-year-old girl standing before an altar, wearing a crown that weighs more than most books, while hundreds of the most powerful men in Poland kneel before her. This actually happened, and it wasn't some medieval fantasy story. But here's the question that probably crossed your mind, just like it crossed the minds of everyone in that cathedral. Why on earth would an entire kingdom place their fate in the hands of a child? The answer takes us into the messy, complicated world of medieval politics, where every decision was a matter of life and death. When Jadwiga's father, King Louis I, died, Poland found itself in a crisis. Think about it from their perspective for a moment. They had just lost their king, and the kingdom needed someone who could unite all the different noble families, keep the peace, and prevent the country from falling apart. This wasn't just about finding any ruler. They needed someone who could bring everyone together. Here's where Jadwiga's story gets really fascinating. The Polish nobles weren't just picking names out of a hat. They looked at this young girl and saw something remarkable: her Polish ancestry. Even though she was born in Hungary and was technically part of the French Angevin royal family, her bloodline connected her directly to the Polish people in a way that mattered deeply to medieval minds. You see, in those days, blood wasn't just about biology. It was about legitimacy, about belonging, about having the divine right to rule. The nobles could look at Jadwiga and say, "This isn't just some foreign princess being imposed on us. This is one of us." Her Polish heritage gave her something that no amount of military power or political maneuvering could provide: genuine acceptance from the people she would govern. But let's be honest about what was really happening here. These weren't sentimental nobles making a heartwarming decision about a sweet little girl. This was hardcore medieval politics. They chose Jadwiga because she represented stability in a world where kingdoms could collapse overnight. She was young enough to be moldable, connected enough to be legitimate, and positioned perfectly to unite different factions that might otherwise tear the country apart. The coronation itself must have been an incredible sight. Imagine this small figure in royal robes that probably dragged on the floor, receiving the sacred oils, and having the ancient crown of Poland placed on her head. The weight of that crown wasn't just physical. It carried the expectations of an entire nation, the hopes of common people who needed strong leadership, and the political calculations of nobles who had bet their futures on a child. What makes this even more remarkable is that this wasn't just a ceremonial gesture while adults made the real decisions behind the scenes. No, Jadwiga was about to become the actual, working queen of Poland. She would need to learn statecraft, diplomacy, military strategy, and religious leadership, all while dealing with the normal challenges of growing up. It's almost hard to imagine the pressure this young girl must have felt, knowing that millions of lives depended on the decisions she would make. Now, if you thought crowning a 10-year-old was dramatic, wait until you hear about the marriage that changed the entire map of Eastern Europe. This is where Jadwiga's story takes a turn that reads like something out of a political thriller, complete with broken promises, international intrigue, and a decision that would echo through centuries of history. Picture this. Jadwiga is now a teenage queen, probably around 14 years old, when the most important marriage proposal of the medieval world lands on her desk. But this wasn't some romantic fairy tale with a Prince Charming riding up to the castle. This was hardcore medieval diplomacy, where marriages were weapons of war and tools of empire building. The suitor in question was Władysław Jagiełło, the Grand Duke of Lithuania. Now, Lithuania at this time wasn't the small Baltic country we know today. We're talking about one of the largest European states in history, stretching from the Baltic Sea all the way down to the Black Sea. Jagiełło ruled over territories that covered what we now call Lithuania, Belarus, and large parts of Ukraine. This guy wasn't just powerful. He controlled lands that made him one of the most influential rulers in all of Europe. But here's where the human drama comes in. Jadwiga was already promised to someone else. She had been engaged since childhood to Wilhelm of Austria, a Habsburg prince who represented an entirely different political alliance. Imagine being a teenager and having to choose between honoring a childhood promise and making a decision that could reshape the world. That's exactly the position Jadwiga found herself in. The pressure on her must have been incredible. On one side, you had the Austrian alliance, which offered stability and connections to Western Europe. On the other side, you had the Lithuanian proposal, which promised something much bigger: the creation of a superpower that could dominate Eastern Europe for generations to come. And here's what makes this story even more compelling. Jagiełło wasn't just offering a political alliance. He was offering to convert from paganism to Christianity, bringing his entire massive kingdom into the Christian fold. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about faith, about bringing one of the last great pagan nations in Europe into the Christian world. So what did Jadwiga do? She made one of the most consequential decisions in European history. She chose Jagiełło, and with that choice, she created what would become known as the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This wasn't just any ordinary kingdom. This was a political entity that would dominate Eastern Europe for the next 4 centuries, becoming one of the largest and most powerful states the continent had ever seen. The marriage took place, and suddenly you had this massive union stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, with territories that included modern-day Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, and parts of Russia, Latvia, and Estonia. It was like watching 2 puzzle pieces click together to form a completely new picture of European power. But here's something fascinating that most people don't know about Jadwiga. She wasn't just a political chess piece making strategic moves. This young queen had a heart as big as her kingdom. She was known throughout her realm for her incredible generosity and deep religious devotion. Get this. She actually took her own personal jewelry and royal treasures and donated them to rebuild the University of Krakow. Think about that for a moment. Here's a teenage queen who could have lived in luxury beyond imagination, and instead she's selling her crown jewels to fund education. The University of Krakow, which she helped restore, is still there today, over 600 years later, as one of Europe's oldest and most respected institutions of learning. Students are still walking through halls that exist because a medieval queen chose books over baubles. This tells us something really important about who Jadwiga was as a person. Yes, she made brilliant political decisions that changed the course of history, but she also understood that true leadership meant investing in the future, in knowledge, in the betterment of her people's minds and souls. Now, if you're thinking that being a teenage queen married to a powerful duke sounds like a fairy tale where everything works out perfectly, let me tell you the real story. Jadwiga's reign was about to face tests that would challenge even the most experienced rulers, and she was still just a young woman trying to figure out how to lead an entire kingdom. First, let's talk about the enemies within her own court. Imagine walking into a room full of men who are twice your age, have been playing political games since before you were born, and are now supposed to take orders from someone who could be their daughter. That's exactly what Jadwiga faced every single day. Some of these nobles looked at her and saw not a legitimate queen, but a young girl who didn't belong on the throne. These weren't just grumpy old men complaining behind closed doors. We're talking about powerful lords who controlled vast territories, commanded armies, and had the influence to make life very difficult for a young queen. They would test her decisions, question her judgment, and sometimes openly challenge her authority. Picture being 20 years old and having to stare down men who could crush you with a single word to the right person. But here's where Jadwiga's true character began to shine through. Instead of crumbling under pressure or letting others make decisions for her, she learned to navigate these treacherous political waters with remarkable skill. She discovered that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the smartest, the most prepared, and the most determined to protect your people. Then there were the external threats, and none were more dangerous than the Teutonic Knights. Now, these weren't your typical medieval knights in shining armor helping damsels in distress. The Teutonic Order was essentially a military machine disguised as a religious organization. They controlled territories along the Baltic coast, and had been expanding aggressively for decades, conquering lands in the name of Christianity, but really building their own empire. The Teutonic Knights looked at the newly formed Polish-Lithuanian alliance and saw both a threat and an opportunity. Here was this massive new power bloc on their doorstep, ruled by a young queen and her recently converted husband. They probably thought they could intimidate or outmaneuver this inexperienced royal couple. They were wrong. Jadwiga proved to be far more cunning than anyone expected. When the Teutonic Knights tried to play diplomatic games, she played them better. When they attempted to use military pressure, she found ways to turn their own tactics against them. She understood something that many of her older, more experienced contemporaries missed. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to avoid having it in the first place. One of the most fascinating things about watching Jadwiga handle these challenges is seeing how she transformed from a young girl who was chosen for political reasons into a genuine leader who earned respect through her actions. She learned to read people, to understand their motivations, and to find ways to turn potential enemies into allies. Think about the incredible pressure she must have felt. Every decision she made could mean the difference between peace and war, between prosperity and disaster for millions of people. When she went to bed at night, she probably lay awake wondering if she had made the right choices, if she was strong enough for the job, if her people would be safe because of the decisions she had made that day. But here's what makes her story so inspiring. She didn't just survive these challenges, she thrived under them. Jadwiga discovered that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and making the hard decisions anyway. She learned that true strength comes not from having all the answers, but from being willing to find them, no matter how difficult the search might be. By the time her enemies realized they were dealing with a formidable opponent rather than an inexperienced girl, Jadwiga had already established herself as one of the most effective rulers of her time. She had turned potential weaknesses into strengths, transformed skeptics into supporters, and proved that leadership has nothing to do with age or gender and everything to do with wisdom, courage, and an unwavering commitment to your people. By the way, isn't it incredible that this same queen who was facing down powerful nobles and military orders also found time to fund the reconstruction of the University of Krakow? If you're enjoying this deep dive into Jadwiga's remarkable story, show some love by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves incredible historical stories, and make sure you're subscribed to the Medieval Archives so you never miss these amazing journeys through history. And here's a question for you. Drop a comment and let me know what you think about a 10-year-old being crowned queen of an entire kingdom. Could you imagine having that kind of responsibility at such a young age? Now comes the part of Jadwiga's story that breaks your heart. Because just when she had proven herself as one of the most capable rulers of her time, fate dealt her the cruelest hand imaginable. It's the year 1399, and Jadwiga is now 25 years old. She's successfully navigated the treacherous waters of medieval politics, created one of Europe's most powerful alliances, and earned the respect of even her harshest critics. She's no longer that 10-year-old girl who was crowned out of political necessity. She's become a true queen in every sense of the word. And then something wonderful happens. Jadwiga becomes pregnant with her first child. Imagine the joy this must have brought to the royal court. After 15 years of marriage to Jogaila, the queen was finally going to have an heir. This wasn't just personal happiness. This was the future of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth growing inside her. But medieval childbirth was a dangerous gamble that even queens couldn't escape. Despite having the best medical care available in the 14th century, complications arose during the birth. Both Jadwiga and her newborn daughter faced a fight for their lives. And tragically, it was a battle neither would win. The loss was devastating on multiple levels. In a single moment, Poland lost not only its beloved queen but also the future she represented. The little girl who might have continued her mother's legacy never had the chance to take her first breath. The royal couple who had waited so long for a child saw their dreams shattered in the span of a few heartbreaking days. Think about what this meant for Jogaila. He had found in Jadwiga not just a political partner, but a true companion who had helped him navigate the complex world of European politics. Now he was suddenly alone, faced with ruling this vast commonwealth without the woman who had been his anchor and guide. But here's where Jadwiga's story takes on an almost mythical quality. Even though her life was cut short, the legacy she left behind was so powerful that it continued to grow long after her death. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that she helped create would go on to become one of the largest and most influential states in European history, lasting for centuries and shaping the destiny of millions of people. The people of Poland never forgot their young queen who had given everything for her kingdom. Stories of her generosity, her wisdom, and her devotion spread throughout the land. They remembered how she had donated her jewels to rebuild the University of Krakow, how she had stood up to powerful enemies, and how she had always put the needs of her people before her own comfort. But perhaps the most remarkable testament to Jadwiga's impact came almost 600 years after her death. In 1997, the Catholic Church canonized her as Saint Jadwiga, officially recognizing her as the patron saint of Poland. Think about that for a moment. A woman who died in the 14th century was so revered by her people that 6 centuries later, they were still telling stories about her holiness and dedication. This wasn't just some automatic process because she was a queen. The Catholic Church has very strict requirements for sainthood. They had to prove that Jadwiga lived a life of exceptional virtue, that she performed miracles, and that people continued to pray to her and receive help through her intercession. The fact that she met these criteria shows just how deeply she had touched the hearts and souls of her people. When you think about it, Jadwiga achieved something that most rulers can only dream of. She became immortal in the hearts of her people. While other medieval monarchs are remembered mainly by historians, Jadwiga is still actively venerated by millions of people who see her not just as a historical figure, but as a spiritual guide and protector. Her story reminds us that true greatness isn't measured by how long you live, but by how much good you manage to do with the time you're given. Jadwiga packed more wisdom, courage, and compassion into her 25 years than most people manage in twice that time. She showed us that leadership isn't about power or privilege. It's about service, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to making the world a better place than you found it. But wait, there's more to this story that most people never hear about. We've talked about Jadwiga's marriage to Jogaila as this brilliant strategic move that created a European superpower. But the reality behind closed doors was far more complicated and emotionally wrenching than most history books let on. Here's what really happened, and it reads like something out of a medieval soap opera. Long before anyone had ever heard of Władysław Jogaila, there was another man in Jadwiga's life. His name was Wilhelm of Austria, and this wasn't just some casual arrangement made by diplomats over wine and handshakes. Wilhelm and Jadwiga had been promised to each other since they were children. We're talking about a betrothal that had been years in the making, with treaties signed, dowries negotiated, and two young people who had grown up knowing they would one day be husband and wife. In Wilhelm's mind, and probably in Jadwiga's too, this wasn't just a political arrangement, it was their future. Now imagine being Wilhelm of Austria. You've spent years preparing to marry the Queen of Poland. You've learned about Polish customs, you've probably started learning the language, and you've built your entire future around this union. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, you get word that your bride-to-be is marrying someone else entirely. Not just anyone else, but the pagan Grand Duke of Lithuania. The betrayal must have felt devastating on a personal level, but it was also a massive diplomatic insult. The Habsburgs were one of the most powerful families in Europe, and breaking an engagement with them wasn't something you did lightly. This was the kind of move that could start wars, end alliances, and create enemies that would last for generations. But here's where the story gets even more complicated. Some historians believe that Jadwiga and Wilhelm might have actually had genuine feelings for each other. There are accounts suggesting that Wilhelm actually traveled to Krakow to try to claim his bride, and that there were dramatic confrontations at the royal court. Picture this: a young Austrian prince showing up at the Polish palace, demanding to marry the woman who had been promised to him, while Lithuanian diplomats are frantically trying to finalize their own marriage negotiations. For Jadwiga, this must have been one of the most painful decisions of her life. She was caught between personal feelings, diplomatic promises, and the massive political pressure to secure the Lithuanian alliance. Remember, she was still just a teenager dealing with the kind of choice that would challenge even the most experienced political leaders. The decision to break off the Austrian engagement and marry Jogaila wasn't just about choosing between two suitors. It was about choosing between two completely different futures for Poland. The Austrian marriage would have aligned Poland more closely with Western Europe, potentially bringing the kingdom into the sphere of the Holy Roman Empire. The Lithuanian marriage promised something much more ambitious: the creation of a new Eastern European power that could rival any kingdom on the continent. But this decision came with serious consequences that Jadwiga would have to deal with for the rest of her reign. The Austrian Habsburgs didn't just shrug and move on. They became a persistent problem, constantly looking for ways to undermine the Polish-Lithuanian alliance and create trouble for Jadwiga's kingdom. Even more challenging were the ripple effects within Poland itself. Some Polish nobles who had favored the Austrian alliance felt betrayed by the sudden change of plans. They worried that allying with Lithuania would make Poland too dependent on its eastern neighbor, or that Jogaila might eventually try to dominate Polish politics. Throughout her reign, Jadwiga had to constantly prove that she hadn't sold out Polish interests for Lithuanian power. She had to show skeptical nobles that her marriage was about strengthening Poland, not weakening it. Every major decision she made was scrutinized through the lens of this controversial choice, and her enemies never let her forget that she had broken her word to Austria. What makes this even more remarkable is how Jadwiga managed to turn what could have been a political disaster into one of the most successful alliances in European history. She somehow convinced her critics that abandoning the Austrian match was the right choice, that the Lithuanian alliance would serve Poland's interests better than any Western European connection ever could. The intrigue surrounding her marriage shows us something important about medieval politics. Nothing was ever simple, and every decision carried personal, diplomatic, and strategic consequences that could last for decades. Jadwiga wasn't just choosing a husband, she was choosing the future direction of European history. So there you have it. The incredible story of Jadwiga, a queen who started her journey as a 10-year-old girl chosen for political reasons and ended it as one of the most revered leaders in European history. When you really think about everything she accomplished in just 25 years, it's almost hard to believe one person could have such a massive impact on the world. Let's take a step back and look at what this young woman actually achieved. She took the crown at an age when most kids today are still figuring out their favorite video games, and somehow managed to unite an entire kingdom behind her leadership. She made the kind of marriage decision that changed the map of Europe, creating a superpower that would influence world events for the next 4 centuries. She faced down powerful enemies, navigated treacherous political waters, and earned the respect of people who initially saw her as nothing more than a child playing dress-up in royal robes. But what really sets Jadwiga apart isn't just her political achievements, remarkable as they were. It's the kind of person she chose to be while wielding all that power. She could have lived a life of luxury and self-indulgence, but instead she gave away her jewels to fund education. She could have ruled through fear and intimidation, but instead she chose compassion and wisdom. She could have focused solely on building her own legacy, but instead she dedicated herself to improving the lives of her people. Think about the lessons her story teaches us even today. Age doesn't determine your ability to lead. Wisdom and courage do. The hardest decisions are often the right ones, even when they come with personal sacrifice. True leadership isn't about having all the power. It's about using whatever power you have to make the world better for others. Jadwiga's legacy lives on in ways that go far beyond history books. Every student who walks through the halls of the University of Krakow is benefiting from her generosity. Every Polish person who prays to Saint Jadwiga is drawing strength from her example. Every young person who faces seemingly impossible challenges can look to her story and realize that age is no barrier to making a real difference in the world. What's most amazing is that in a time when women had very few rights and even fewer opportunities to lead, Jadwiga didn't just survive in a man's world. She thrived in it. She proved that leadership has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with character, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right. Her story reminds us that history isn't just about dates and battles and political treaties. It's about real people making real choices that echo through the centuries. Jadwiga was a real person who faced real challenges, made real sacrifices, and achieved real greatness. She showed us that one person, no matter how young or how unlikely, can change the course of history if they have the courage to try. In a world that often feels divided and uncertain, Jadwiga's example shines as brightly today as it did 600 years ago. She proved that true strength comes from serving others, that real power lies in bringing people together rather than driving them apart, and that the greatest legacy you can leave is a world that's better because you were in it. If this incredible journey through Jadwiga's remarkable life has inspired you as much as it has inspired me, I'd love for you to show some love by hitting that like button. Share this video with friends who appreciate amazing historical stories, because trust me, they need to hear about this incredible queen. And make sure you're subscribed to the Medieval Archives with notifications turned on, because we're just getting started exploring the fascinating stories of medieval history that will absolutely blow your mind. Until next time, keep exploring the incredible stories that shaped our world.